Alright, so we are going to now work on finance application number 6. This is a more complex and definitely more real life cost benefit analysis. It would look a lot more like what you're going to do with your team cases. This is a real life case. I worked when I was at USAA. I used to do a lot of cost benefit analysis at USAA. It's kind of a side job. It was never the bulk of my job, but maybe 5% of my time I'd be doing these cost benefit analysis. I really thought they were extremely important, and we'll talk in class why I think these are so critical to the success of the firm, that they have a good process in place and the analysis they're doing is actually good accept or reject type of analysis, that it's not projects that management says, hey, get this thing approved, whether it makes sense or not, but we're really asking, does this project make sense? And that's the kind of project I'm hoping you will have for your team cases. You don't know the answer and you want to know the answer. You're doing the analysis to figure out, should we do this or not? I do it all the time in my personal life. I did it a lot when I was at USAA. It just makes sense to do this type of analysis. And so this particular case, some background. So this is several years ago. I'm sure they've automated a lot of this now, but at the time USAA did not have this automated. So some of USAA's customers are going to their bank and doing what they call bill pay. So they tell their bank, hey, you know what, I don't want to have to mail these checks in every month. Can you pay these bills for me? You set up the vendor with the bill pay service. You tell the bill pay service when you want the check mailed, how much the amount should be. The bill pay service will create an invoice, which is really critical to this. They create an invoice and they create a check. It was not automated at all. It seemed automated from the customer standpoint, but from USA's standpoint, it was very unautomated. And so the bill pay service sent a check and an invoice they created to USAA. Now, if the customer had not used bill pay, if they had just mailed in the check in the envelope with the invoice USAA had provided, USAA machines at the time, they're probably faster now, but at the time they had machines that could process 40,000 of these an hour because they could read the invoice. The computers could read the invoice. They could actually take the check and the invoice out of the envelope and then run it through a check endorsing machine that could read the invoice, read the check, even read the handwriting on the check. If the handwriting on check, if the dollar amount matched one of the values on the invoice, it would match those up, go through the process. Very low error rate. I forget their error rate was, or their accuracy rate was something like 99.99%. You know, 1 out of 10,000 would have an error. So very, very low error rate. But now with this bill paying service, the bank mails a check with an invoice that the computers could not read. And so now instead of doing 40,000 an hour, they were just doing a few 10, 20, 30 an hour. It was very, very slow process, very manual, many errors, repeat errors, the same errors month after month after month. And so what we did is we went to the largest of these bill paying services that we were seeing, a company called CheckFree, and we asked them, is there a way we can automate these payments so that when you get the payments from our customers, you can match them up, put them in a file that our systems can read, and even faster than our 40,000 per hour, essentially instantaneously, a speed of light, and we get all these bill pays in. Can we do that? The company we dealt with, CheckFree, the largest one, had done this conversion with several of their other customers, and so they knew it could be done. And so let's do this project. And so down below you have the assumptions. I'm not going to walk through the assumptions here because we'll put it into the Excel. You have a few other issues that we'll talk through as we go through, and a few other policies that they have. So we'll talk through some of these in class, but right now what I want to do is show you what do I believe is a good format for an Excel spreadsheet that's doing a cost-benefit analysis. So you have the spreadsheet, you're going to do this cost-benefit analysis. You want to set it up so that it's someone else other than you where to load this file, say a week from now, or a month from now, or 5 years from now. And they wanted to see, hey, how did you get this analysis? What did you do? They can understand it. They can see what you did. So I'm going to have the first sheet here. I'm going to have an empty sheet. I'm just going to call it overview or introduction or whatever. And here what you want to do is give you want to do a project description. This project assesses whether we should convert our bill pay transactions to electronic, something like that. Forgive the typos. The other thing I like, so a project description, when you do your team cases, you'll have an Excel spreadsheet that you will turn in. I want to see the project description there. And then you'll probably have a Word document you'll turn in, which will also have a project description, probably more descriptive, more words in there. And then you have the layout of the Excel spreadsheet. I want you to do this as well in your Excel model. So what is in your model? So the first thing we're going to have is assumptions. We're going to have a page of assumptions. The next thing we're going to have is the base case. I'm a very big believer in doing scenario analysis, looking at best case, worst case kind of thing. So we'll try a best case, a worst case, and then I'm also a big fan of doing a break even. In this particular project, when I calculated the break even, it was at a break even level that made it obvious we should do the project. I'm going to put at the very end, you might move this to the second page, but you want to have a summary chart of what all you found, so people don't have to go to all these places. So those are the charts, those are the places we're going to have. So let's create these sheets. So the second sheet is going to be assumptions. We're going to go to the base case and stop for right now. That's what I want you to do with your team cases. I want you to build the assumptions, which is the most important part of the whole thing. You've got to have good assumptions. The base case, doing the actual net present value, is usually pretty straightforward. Once you have your assumptions, it's just a matter of multiplying, adding numbers together. So that's very straightforward. So what I'll be asking in the semester is that let's get that base case perfect. Let's, you as a team and me as your professor and somewhat of a critique, devil's advocate, will critique and challenge every assumption, everything you set up. Get that base case so everyone agrees, yeah, that base case is exactly what we want. Once you have the base case set up, doing the best case and worst case and break even is very fast, very, very easy. So we got to get the base case. Once you get the base case, you're about 95% there, other than writing up the case itself. And even that is not that difficult because you're just summarizing what you did in Excel. The other thing I like to do is hyperlink. So what I want to do in hyperlink, you can see I have the assumptions here. I'm going to delete this after we get them loaded. So I'm going to put this off to the side just so we can see that. But that's our assumptions page. I'm going to go back to the overview. I'm going to go to the word assumptions. I'm going to right click and I'm going to go to the very bottom. Now, if you have a Microsoft machine, it might be slightly different than this. But the very bottom, it says hyperlink. I'm going to click on that. I want to place a hyperlink. You see the second option here is place in this document. Click on the word assumption and say OK. And now when you click on assumptions, it goes to the assumptions page. On the assumptions page, I want to put a link in for overview. And I want to put a link in for base case. So go to the word overview and right click and hyperlink. Place in this document and put it in the overview. And then on the base case, right click, hyperlink, place in this document and go to the base case. That way we can jump back to the overview, jump to the assumptions, jump to the base case. We'll probably be spending most of our time jumping between assumptions and base case. So in the base case, let's type assumptions and let's put a hyperlink there so we can go back to our assumptions page. So now we can jump back and forth. So now we have our assumptions. So I'm going to come down to row 5 and we're going to do our assumptions and we'll list each one. We probably need a little bit of column width here. And what we're going to do with the assumptions is we're going to have a base case a best case and a worst case. And I want you to do this with your own project. And then the last thing you want to put there is source. Where did you get these assumptions from? All right, so let's clean this up again. Make it look professional. Every time you do anything in Excel, I would highly recommend that you spend a little extra time up front building it, making it look good, look professional, so that you don't spend hours at the end doing that. You spend a few extra seconds as you go, so that the spreadsheet's looking strong. So let's get our assumptions in here first. So if we look at the assumptions, I'll delete this after the fact. It won't let me bring it over for some reason. So let's see if I can shrink this down just a little bit. So here's our assumptions. The very first one is, how many of these bill paying transactions do we receive from CheckFree every year? So my first assumption is number of transactions. The base case is 80,000, and it's my only case. I don't have a best and worst case. You have to see with the case that you do for your team, you'll probably have one particular item that you do as a best, base, and worst case. You might have two. We'll talk in class about that. You have to have at least one. And the one, if you're only going to have one, you want the one that you think is the most important assumption, the one that you're most uncertain about and is most material to the case. So you need those two things. You're uncertain about it and it's material to the case. And then on the source, I'm going to say this comes from cash management. Cash management says, hey, we do 80,000 of these a year, so that's my source. Number of transactions. The next one is transactions per, I'm going to say full-time equivalent, or FTE. Hopefully you've heard that term before. So I'm just going to use FTE if you don't mind. I've had some students who've never heard of FTE before, so just in case you haven't heard of that, but it's a full-time equivalent. That's very important to this department because they use a lot of part-time people in this department. And because of that, we might have 6 people, but they're all working part-time, so it's really three full-time equivalents of people, but it's actually 6 people. So that's 20,000. They can each do 20,000. So you can see right off the bat, we need 4 people in this department, at least 4 FTEs in this department. Again, I got that assumption from cash management. All right, the next assumption is we're getting 80,000 of these right now, but this is a fast-growing part of our business. It's growing at 4% a year, so growth in transactions. And that's real important for your cases. Either growth in transactions or also inflation is really important. So here we're going to put 4%. We're not going to do a best or worst case on this one. This comes from, again, cash management and their forecast. All right, so we've got 3 assumptions down. And then the next assumption is the most important one, and that's percentage of transactions converted. So when we talk to the vendor, we ask them, how many of these can you convert? And they said they gave us 90%. And I considered that to be the best case scenario. Because the vendor really wanted to do this, and my guess was they're probably exaggerating this. So my expected case, I used 70%. The way I got this is, so this comes from the vendor and a vendor client survey. So that's how I got these numbers. So when I did a survey, I think they gave me 10 of their clients that had done this conversion. And I called them all and I looked at on the average or the median. 70% was what most of them were getting, or about, it was in the midpoint where they were getting. Some were better, some were worse. The 90% was really the best case with those vendors. So you can, with those clients. So you can see the vendor really gave us the best case scenario because they had one client that got 90%. So I used 70. The worst case, I'm going to use 50%. And again, that's based on my survey. In my survey, 1 of the 10 clients only got 50% converted. So I say, okay, that's the worst out of their 10 clients. That's probably our worst case as well. So we'll use 50%. The next thing we're going to get to here is, I have to shrink this down a little bit. Let me show you the assumption and we'll build it in. We have to pay our employees, and when we pay our employees, we pay these employees at this particular job $50,000 for a full-time employee. So this may not be 4 people, it might be 8 people and they're all working part-time, but for 1 full-time person or 2 half-time people, we pay them $50,000 in base pay, you know, they're just their salary. And then we give them other pay like a 401k plan, a pension plan, bonuses, you know, holiday bonuses, 15%. So 50,000 base plus 15%. So we'll put salary per FTE, and that's 50,000. And remember, if it's dollars, make sure to always use dollar signs. And then we have other compensation. We're going to say that that's 15%. You can put that into your assumptions as percentage of salary, so people know what that applies to. These 2 came from payroll. So payroll told me how much we pay these employees. One thing you'll see with your team case is some of your assumptions, you may need an entire sheet to get your assumptions. You may want to look historically at some data, like if you're doing solar panels or if you're looking for inflation in gasoline prices. So you might have an extra sheet that does that, and then you can hyperlink your source. Your source can be that sheet in your spreadsheet so that you can click on that and see where you got that assumption. So you may have an entire sheet in your spreadsheet that comes up with 1 assumption, and then your assumptions just have that 1 number. So I don't need that in here because I'm giving you all the assumptions, but that could be needed. The next thing we have is indirect cost. And indirect costs are $500 per employee. Indirect cost per FTE, and that's $500. Where that came from the CFO area. And we are not going to use this. Now this is key here. I put this in here. These are indirect costs. If we were to eliminate these employees or, you know, push them over to another department where they're needed, this $500 would not go away. USA would still be paying that amount. It's an allocated cost. So it's from CFO, but I'm going to put in my analysis, not used in the analysis. So why in the world would I do that? Why would I put something in that I'm not going to use? And the reason for that is, if my boss comes and asks me, hey, what did you do with indirect costs? Did you remember those? I can say, we remember them, but we didn't use them. That's much better than saying, wow, I can't remember what we did. Here you have it documented. Not using analysis, this is not a true incremental cost. So that goes, I put it in there just in case. You might do that in your cases. For example, if you're doing the solar panels, someone might say, well, what is that going to do to your homeowner's insurance? And you do some research, you can discover that adding solar panels to the house really doesn't increase homeowner's insurance costs any. You would still put it in your assumptions and show it as 0 and just say, hey, we thought about it, it's in there, but we decided it was 0 based on our analysis. The next thing we have is inflation and those compensation costs. This 50,000 is going to be, so we'll call it payroll inflation. That 50,000 is going to go up 5% every year, and you're going to need to put inflation in. For example, if you're buying an electric car versus a gasoline powered car, gasoline prices will go up, electricity prices will go up. What inflation rate are you going to use on those? So this again comes from CFO, and at that time, 5% was probably about right. They're probably not using 5% today, but that was what we were using back then. And then the software development. Software development. Now this one's a little tricky. the number I was quoted, these are made up numbers, but they're not far off from what I had, $565,000. I knew when I got this number that there was probably some allocated costs in there. I got this from the technology department, and I knew there was probably some time allocated from the CEO of the technology department, probably some other costs. Gaining a true incremental cost on the software was just almost impossible. So what I did is I went ahead and used the number. If the net present value came out negative, I might go back to the IT department and say how much of this cost is truly cost that will go, we're actually spending. That if we didn't do this project, those costs would go away. But if the net present value is positive, then essentially this is conservatism. I know there's some costs in here I probably shouldn't have, but this comes from the IT department. This is how they charge their time. They gave us an hourly amount, how much they thought this project would take in hours. Now you might say this is something you might want to do best case and worst case. Costs that happen at time zero up front, I don't like to do scenarios on that because there's no time value of money. It's all up front. So if your net present value is $40,000, you know you can spend an extra $40,000 on the software and you still have a positive net present value. So to me, it's really not useful. It's something you know up front. If you do this project, you get a positive net present value, and then the software people say, you know what, it's going to actually cost us $650,000. You'll know immediately that your net present value is going to be negative because if you raise your costs, $80,000, but your net present value is only $40,000, those costs at time zero, they're very easy to work into the analysis. So I don't like doing anything you have at time zero. I would not do a sensitivity analysis on. And then the weighted average cost of capital, I'm just going to call it WACC. That's 7%. I like having 2 decimal places on inflation and WACC. I don't know why. That again comes from CFO. So we've got all of our assumptions built. So I'm going to freeze it here so these videos don't go too long. I want you to get this built. And so what we'll do next, I'm going to delete this little sheet that I beat. What we'll do next is we're going to build the base case very similarly to what we did when we built the cost-benefit analysis for the problem set 5, but I'm going to do it from scratch. If you like to, you can copy what you did from problem set 5, but just for practice, it's probably good to do it from scratch. So we'll stop it here.